Hello and welcome. My name is Mary Rose Lyons, the founder of Bright Spark Consulting, and I'm going to moderate a panel discussion on digital transformation in Ireland, what's required to make this happen. Featuring Peter Hendrick, the CEO of National Broadband Ireland, Seamus Dunn, the Managing Director of Interaction, and Rebecca Keenan, who's the Global Head of Process Automation at Expleo. Welcome all.
Thanks, Mary Rose.
Can we begin, guys? I think it'd be really important to let's define what we all believe digital transformation to be. So maybe, Peter, you could begin and tell me, what does digital transformation mean to you?
Thanks, Mary Rose. Delighted to join the show today. I suppose when I think about digital transformation, it's something that we've all heard about and talked about probably for 20 years. I look at it as the utilization of technology to improve productivity, reduce operational costs, but also to make our businesses more agile. And coming from, I started out my career in technology and then started our own business many years ago. It was really about how agile we were as a startup and using technology tools in order to compete against some of the more incumbent competitors in the market. I think that's more the case now as we go forward. We have to be more agile as startups, but also as existing traditional businesses. So technology has to be utilized across all areas of businesses today.
Absolutely, absolutely. What about you, Seamus? What are your thoughts, your definition?
Yeah, well, it's very similar to Peter, that the use of digital technology, which pretty much means software for the most part, to solve problems. Take things that were manual before and solve them with digital technology. I think there's obvious ones that are kind of very native, Uber. We all know Uber. My kids use Revolut. That's really enabling digital technologies in old style businesses. For me though, as a co-location and connectivity provider, it's a lot about enabling businesses' IT departments to become, more agile, as Peter used. I think that's it. It's very much IT was for productivity historically, back in the day. Now it's speed and agility. Advent of technology like containers and Kubernetes and DevOps practices, to help businesses run. So that's where I kind of spend more of my time.
Okay. And Rebecca, you are very strong in the area of data automation. Tell me what your take on it is.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what Peter and Seamus were saying, and I guess it's that $1 million question when you're asked what digital transformation is. It's quite loaded because so many people have so many different definitions. And I think just to baseline what I think it is, it's using technology to make us more efficient. And whether that be a blockchain project or an MS Teams implementation, it's all digital transformation, just at different scales. And yes, I'm kind of very heavily based in that process automation, digital workforce space of the industry, and that's very much leans into creating more agile workforces, giving people our alternative resourcing models at times, because maybe we can have challenges solved with digital workers, not just our human teams. But then if we start having that conversation, how do we make them all interact with each other? And that's kind of where I see that digital transformation. We have the big stuff that we all have to do, but then also, well, how are we engaging our people? How are we engaging our customers then on the back of that as well? So again, a loaded questions at times, but that's my take on it.
That's really exciting stuff. So what I'm hearing is it's very much about agile workforces. Human beings are very much front and center. And I think what you all spoke to is that it's something that's for startups and existing companies. So I think what I'm hearing is that for a small open economy like Ireland, we can really benefit, and we can move quite quickly if we embrace digital transformation. So in your day-to-day workings with businesses of all shapes and sizes, how do you find the attitude towards digital transformation? Are we necessarily an agile workforce, or do we need to be convinced?
Is that to myself? Yeah, I see both sides and I understand both sides as well. There is definitely that automation anxiety, I think, and that I think due to COVID is only getting worse at the moment with people. And I guess something I talk a lot about with my clients, with my team is, we have to take that on board. So we have all this great technology available to us. We have all this great infrastructure that, companies across Ireland are helping us to get better. But if we don't have an equal focus on people and what that's doing to roles, how it's changing roles, I work a lot with robots and digital workers that do great things, but quite often they have to interact with a human team. So if the human team doesn't know what to do, we see 0%, benefits from it. Even me talking here, I'm moving between human and robot quite easily because it's the world that I live in, but that's not everyone's world. So even that can get some getting used to. So I think it's definitely, we need to have, definitely the technology focus is really important, but I think in parallel, we have to have that human-centric feel for it as well.
Absolutely. I think, when we had a conversation before, dropping in robots and we create this in 40 seconds, I was just like, that is the sexy end of digital transformation, totally. But I think
that's kind of the joy as well, because it's that manual, repetitive work. And one of my favorite parts of my job is when I go talk to a team after we've deployed something and they say, I hated doing that task, or we have so many hours back in the day. Like the example we talked about, Mary Rose, we took a HR process that was manually taking 4 hours and a robot does it in 30 seconds. So again, those time differences are huge. And it also gives time back to a HR team who should be in front of people, not in front of spreadsheets, essentially.
Absolutely. So maybe a lot of the digital transformation is kind of like undoing a lot of the kind of spreadsheet build-up that took place in the last 2 decades, and maybe we can wipe all that out and bring it back to core efficiency. But I think one of the things, that's the kind of sexy end of digital transformation, but one of the things that's so important is having the strong infrastructure. So Peter, what are your thoughts, or what can you share with us on the sexy end of infrastructure for Ireland that we can expect coming very shortly?
I hope. Yeah, look, I think the infrastructure, or the connectivity part of the infrastructure, is critical. If I look back over 20 years, all of the underlying technologies we're talking about here and utilizing have been around for 20 years. Automation, you think about the applications of GPS, technology sitting on our iPhone, unified communication. We all remember unified communication. When we talked about it 15 years ago, it was going to revolutionize how we worked, and it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Everybody using video on their phones 20 years ago, it didn't happen. And a lot of that's around the critical infrastructure that sits underneath that, which is the connectivity and high-speed connectivity. And this goes for both fixed and for mobile, and ultimately having the scalability to meet all the demands of applications. And then moving from what I would see as on-premise type applications and hardware to software as a service, cloud-based, the ability to support people no matter where they are. You don't have to be stuck in an office with connectivity. And we've all seen this go from, half a meg being, everything in the world for connectivity, through to 10 meg, through to 100. At National Broadband Ireland, we're actually bringing 500 megabits per second across the country. We're rolling out fiber across 96% of the landmass of the country, and we're going to connect 1.1 million people all throughout Ireland. Doesn't matter where you are in terms of regional, rural Ireland, with 500 megabits per second as the minimum product and service, and that we will support services up to 1 gigabits per second. And I think what's critical for us to really transform in terms of how we use technology, and that view of it's a robot or it's a machine learning or whatever it is, needs to be seamless. Training is a critical part to it. Mm-hmm. When I look at our business, I mean, we started at the beginning of this year in terms of the launch of the National Broadband Plan with 30 to 40 people in the company. Mm-hmm. We've brought on board over 120 people, and we've brought them predominantly in COVID. So we've hired, recruited people, and we've kind of grown up in a virtual environment where all of the applications and services we use are all cloud-based. And that includes HR, for example, we talked about earlier on, HR and adopting that, the intranet in terms of bringing people in, the training. We have a training program for every single thing we do, whether that's simply using Microsoft applications, or it's using video tools, or it's engaging in terms of whiteboard sessions, because it's not just the individuals within our organization, it's the companies we interface with. At the moment, we have nearly 600 people working on this project, and all of those people have come in to a virtual environment. So we've had to quickly adapt to working in a virtual world, but connectivity has been critical. And I can see it every day with some of our vendors and suppliers, people working from home, the connection has gone bad, or the application dropped and we had to restart it. And it's a challenge. It certainly is a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that will be solved. And if I look at what the Irish government are doing and the commitment to delivering high-speed broadband to everybody in the country, I think Ireland is in a unique situation whereby we can get rid of that digital blocker, which is connectivity. We solve the fixed broadband connectivity, and then ultimately mobile broadband will benefit from that fixed infrastructure being deployed. And it's a bit like rural electrification 60 years ago. We'll stop talking about connectivity and we'll start talking about how we support digital businesses in regional and rural Ireland. So the infrastructure is critical right now. And once it's there, people stop talking about it and they'll be talking about Explio and interaction and all the other technology business that we can then foster and develop internationally. So that's, I suppose, critical infrastructure is important here.
Actually, can I ask you, Peter, so your team that you've scaled up during COVID time, you know, a lot of our futures depend on them. Do you have any information you could share with us in terms of timeframes for the rollout? Because you had some really impressive numbers there for where we're going to get to. So what's the kind of time frame for much of this to be rolled out?
So when we started in January, so the program started in January, we started recruiting people, bringing subcontractors on board. We've surveyed over 73,000 homes to date across the country. Now, there's two phases to the project. There's getting the infrastructure built, the fibre infrastructure built, which is going to take a number of years. So in advance of actually building out the fibre infrastructure, we're creating what we call broadband connection points, BCPs, around the country. And they're a mixture of business centres, GAA halls, where we provide high-speed broadband today in every single county. So there's between 10 and 14 broadband connection points in every county. At the moment, we're over 50% completed in that program in the first year, where we're going to connect 300 locations. And then on the fibre to the home or fibre to the business, regardless of whether it's a business or a home, that project, we were doing the design of 73,000 is done to date, and we're also started construction this week. So
this week, that's very
this
timely.
week, yeah. So the first,
and you still have time to
places,
do a call with us. That's fantastic, Peter.
Absolutely. So the first places we're looking to build, or we're starting to build, would be Carrigaline and Cork, Galway, and the townlands around Galway and the townlands around Cavan, and then quickly we start to move out from there. Ultimately, we have to start where we see is existing regional infrastructure, where we have connectivity we can bring back to the data centers like Interaction, where we can connect to the internet and out to the wider world. And then from there, the fibre will be built out across rural Ireland. But ultimately, by the
and his crew at Interaction come in. Seamus, tell me about some of the grand plans you have for making this work.
Peter is right about the connectivity. That's got to get solved, not just for people's broadband, but for companies and businesses. So the clients and customers that I'm talking to now, and have been talking to last year, but even more so now, digital transformation for most of those enterprises in Ireland is about moving from an old style of IT to a new style. And that new style is driven by the speed and agility we spoke about before. Most IT decision makers in Ireland, they have two very conflicting jobs. One is they can't let their infrastructure go down, and they can't let the network go down, or their businesses don't work. So it's very, very difficult for them to do that. And you know, historically, efficiency and productivity was the key. So don't take risks with your IT infrastructure. But now that's not going to work, right? Digital transformation is about speed and deployment of new applications fast. So there's some technologies that enable that. I mentioned containers earlier and DevOps practices, to name a few. There's others. So now you can do that quickly, but the economic model is tricky. You know, your budgets, you got to control, you got to execute, you can't let it go down. And it was always assumed the public cloud was the solution, which it's partly the solution, and public cloud providers, AWS, Azure, others, you know, they're definitely part of the solution. I think the SaaS groups, you know, take the example of Salesforce. It's revolutionized the process of selling and the management of it, and it's a software as a service play. That's a form of digital transformation, and there's lots of other of those SaaS providers. For us, though, the thing that we're hearing about from IT groups is it's daunting to move from where they are to where they need to go to, and they really need help. It's just so multifaceted. So to go to, even migrating applications to public cloud is fraught with risk. You're very concerned about your network, and the connectivity, provisioning of that, the backup for it. In interaction, we're trying to move people into co-located data centers where they can have direct public cloud access. We'll have a very carrier-rich environment. So all of the carriers that Peter's probably talking to, 700 of them, in fact, as well as subsea cable. So Aquacom's another great company. They've just landed a submarine cable from the US through Kalala, lands in our data center. So very connectivity-rich, build up the network, locate in our data center for those direct access, and then you can vary and have flexibility about how you change your IT. So that's a transition that's accelerating for every business in Ireland, and they probably need to go faster, but it's daunting and it's risky. They need help.
Rebecca, you can talk more about that help, because I know you're pretty well set up in Expleo for that, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think I agree with Seamus. Sometimes I almost get frustrated because I'm like, well, if we start now, we can have a few robots for you in a couple of weeks instead of having all of this long pre-sales activity. And, we do sometimes need to, and it sounds cliche when I say this, go on that journey with people and really base yourself as an organization in, your own reality. So where is it that we are today? I think sometimes when we look at digital transformation and you see these big solutions on LinkedIn and there's so much going on in the market and there's so many different tools, that again, I think is where a partner really comes into play, because we can do some of that background work to say, well, these tools will not only help you today, but we can move you into the future. And that's something I think is really important, that kind of roadmap for organizations. And I often talk about, let's focus on that at the very beginning when I'm, talking to people, because we need to be realistic in what we can do today, but we very much need to move to that intelligent automation framework. However, I've not seen it yet be done overnight and kind of be done easily. So we really have to base it in reality. So maybe we start with robotic process automation, just pure rule-based automation. It gets our processes ready, it gets our people ready. And then we can start having conversations about, well, how do we start adding in maybe optical character recognition, which means we can digitize more information, process mining. They're calling it hyper automation is the new buzzword that is being kind of talked about. But that is taking all of these different elements, but you can't take them all at the same time. So when I'm talking to clients, it's like, well, let's see what we actually need to get here. Is it compliance? Is it customer facing activities we want to focus on? Is it headcount removal? What is it that we're trying to do, and base ourselves on that reality, and then let the tooling follow.
I think as well, yeah. And I think the more, like, we're at the early adopter stage, the more examples and cases, and the way in Ireland we love to talk amongst ourselves. So the more people are talking to each other about the benefits they've actually derived, I'm sure the more it'll push people in the right direction. Talking to your point, Seamus, like, I'd imagine that for a lot of these kind of IT heads of department, like, it's the first time they're doing this. So, it's not like a kind of a regular sequence that they've deployed often. So I would imagine that the combination of, that kind of like everything else going on, doing something new while, maintaining the existing status quo is quite a challenge. So what would be some of the other challenges be, just generally in the area of, talking to, let's switch on a small island nation to digital. What would be some of the challenges from your perspective, say, Peter?
I think one of the challenges, having looked at companies developing or starting out, software companies, particularly in regional or rural Ireland, has been getting people to actually come work, say, for example, in the Northwest. I've been talking to a company up there who's based up in Carrick-on-Shannon. They have 90 people working for them, and actually getting people into the Northwest or to come home to the Northwest. Yeah. There's 300,000 people from the Northwest who have been through third level education, but they've all gone off to Dublin, or they've gone off to London, or they've gone off to the US. And it's trying to encourage those people to come back to regional, rural Ireland, whereby they've got a better work-life balance. And probably pre-COVID, the view of the world would have been, well, I need to be based in a city. And the view of probably investors equally has been, we need to invest in businesses that are where there's employees, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the shift that's happened over the last number of months is, location is no longer relevant unless connectivity is an issue. So bringing people back to regional Ireland, which we think is critical and important, is the connectivity piece. So if people who, like those 300,000 people who've been through third level education from the Northwest, they want to come home, they want to get that work-life balance. And now organizations are starting to realize, so long as they're connected, they're able to do their job, they're able to be more effective. We've got to be more agile, we've got to use technology, we've got to transform. So all of the things we've been talking about for 20 years and as vendors trying to sell in terms of hardware and software, all are coming to a reality. And I know I was talking to a CEO of an IT company over the weekend, and he said they supplied 8,000 laptops in 1 week to one company at the beginning of COVID. So if there's never been such a digital transformation shift, it's been COVID. COVID has required everybody to shift quickly. And I think that's going to be a significant benefit to how Ireland adapts to the new world we're in, and people start looking for that work-life balance.
And that also feeds into some of the other, large things that are happening. Say, for example, in retail, retail is moving out of the big cities, small towns. It's moving online. It's online plus social selling. So, if more people are going to be working in rural Ireland because they're being supported in this way and they can, it's going to be great for small towns. And, let's face it, the old property prices are a lot cheaper outside of Dublin. Seamus and Rebecca, what would be your thoughts on this actually?
Yeah, I think to add on to some of Peter's points, it's redefining what an expert looks like almost sometimes, because when we look at the new skill sets that we need, the technologies that we're bringing in, that experienced and expert maybe profile that we had in the past, in my opinion, is changed. And our workforce is and should get more diverse. We have new skills. Maybe that means that our typical training paths for our consultants that was 5 days a year, maybe that needs to increase. Maybe we have to change the velocity that we're bringing people up to speed with, this new digital technology. I hire a lot of grads out of college, and they just spent 4 years learning about all these new technologies that we're trying to implement into organizations. Let's use them. Let's bring different types of teams together. So I think that's an element as well, more on the delivery side of how we make this happen, that needs to be appreciated.
Good point. Good point. Seamus, to you to wrap. We're gonna wrap this up soon.
I want to double down on Peter's point about the network and different parts of spreading out in the country, and tell a couple of stories of customers that I've been talking to around the country, but particularly Dublin. They've moved out of offices through necessity with COVID, and they're deciding they're not going to go back, or they'll go back in a much smaller way. And the reason I'm getting to connect with them is they've got the staff moved out, and they might start to use WeWork or some such office space, but their IT gear is left behind. So why did they ever have it in the office building anyway? I can never understand, but it's an evolution, I guess. So we're actually finding there's a lot of companies migrating their IT infrastructure out of their current owned space into our data center, and that's the best way for them to connect to the public cloud. It's the most flexible and economic model for them. One of their big fears, though, to Peter's point again, the network and the connectivity is critical, the security arrangements around it. And maybe it's slightly similar to Rebecca's point, their biggest challenge is they need advice. This isn't something they do every other week. This is hopefully something they do and they don't have to repeat too often. Any change like this is it's got risk with it for their business. So what we're doing is we're building up alliance partnerships where there's experts in every aspect, from network designs, network architecture, to your infrastructure choices, to your security and software arrangements, to which cloud to access. So get even managing transitions and movement and lift and shift and data migration and so there's no one expert they can go to. So you got to build up alliances and partnerships. We built one pretty strong one with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and we're doing it with a few others. But they need a lot of experts like Rebecca and Peter and others to help them along. And that's a big important point for us.
I think if anyone is watching, they should, and they're considering making any moves. I think Seamus, Rebecca and Peter would be most excellent places to start. Guys, I'd like to thank you very, very much for your time today. Thank you for joining us for what has been a really, really interesting panel discussion. For anyone watching, if you would like to engage directly with any of the speakers, you can do it in the live event chat rooms where Rebecca and Seamus and Peter will be all there waiting for your questions. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.